Hey, gang, this week's episode is brought to you by Royal Retros, the king of throwbacks. Hey, if you're looking for teams and leagues that don't exist anymore, but you'd like to remember them in high-quality jersey or uniform format, hey, some of those teams were legendary. Some of them were disasters, but they all live at Royal Retros. Check them out. RoyalRetros.com. Use that promo code SEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. Check them out now. And now, check out this episode.
From the Walter Brown Arena in Boston University, it's the championship round of the World Team Tennis Playoffs between the Los Angeles Strings and the Boston Lobsters. Hello, good evening. I'm Julie Heldman, along with me, Vic Braden. And Vic, Boston had the best record in all of World Team Tennis. They're supposed to win tonight, aren't they?
Well, Eli Nastasi says L.A. is supposed to win. Boston is without Martina Navratilova. However, there's some other factors. It's only 55 degrees in here right now. The court has been put down over ice. Eli Nastasi has a hood he's going to wear later tonight, some thermal underwear, all new situation. Also, in the 24-21 win where LA beat Boston in the opening match, 3 of the matches were very close. I say it's going to go right down to the wire. However, LA wasn't even supposed to be here originally.
No, they weren't. Los Angeles was second in the West, second behind San Diego, but San Diego lost in the first round of the playoffs to Seattle. That left it free for Los Angeles to beat the Gators, whom they got killed in 2 straight, and then they beat New York over Vitas Gerulaitis and Billie Jean King.
Right, but Boston was supposed to be here. They won their league, and then 2 zip scores over New Orleans and Seattle.
On Wednesday night, the first game of the championship round of the playoffs, Los Angeles did win, even though they were down by 5 in the first half. They won on the mighty biceps of Chris Evert, who won both her women's singles and her women's doubles. Tonight's match is going to be the second of the championship round of the playoffs, not the third, as we had said in the program. Tonight's match will be on videotape. That's so we can show you the very best of World Team Tennis action here on Home Box Office.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, let's get this show on the road. How are you, everybody? My name is Tim Hanlon. It is Good Seats Still Available. It is the curious little podcast that is devoted to, you know this by now, what used to be in professional sports. Thanks for finding us. Appreciate you doing so. And telling your friends. We love to keep growing this audience, and we are just amazed at just how this show continues to kind of percolate along and titillate folks with various things from the past in pro sports and related. And we're just delighted that you're joining us for this week's episode as we get into a topic that I have been desperately trying to find angles into for years. We've had a couple of solid base hits and doubles with some folks, in particular Stephen Blush. Our episode from back in, I don't know how many years, but 3 or 4 years ago, episode 187, when his book called Bustin' Balls came out, which is a great book, by the way. Lots of good action shots and conversation about sort of where not only the league was, but also the discussion around the evolution of tennis and equality, equal rights, and all those kinds of things that it was a kind of a microcosm of. But we've nibbled around it with some other conversations as well, but never really kind of beyond that one sort of conversation. And I love looking at old video about this original version of an amazingly innovative concept that soldiered on for years after the initial 5 or so years of its birth in the 1970s. And again, 1970s, as we've talked about with folks like Michael McCambridge, a fertile ground of professional sports entrepreneurship. And, you know, some of the names that we've talked about before in the foundational creations of things like the World Football League and the ABA and the World Hockey Association. Dennis Murphy, the late great Dennis Murphy, right, who had his hand in a bunch of these things. Well, guess what? He had a hand in this thing called World Team Tennis as well. And we are delighted to have somebody who was on the inside of all of this. And just an amazing discovery for me. I put a book out a couple of years ago that I'm only just now discovering. And it's a fascinating look, and the conversation will just excite you to no end as part of that. His name is John Schwarz, and he was very much part and parcel of those 5 years, 1974 to 78, with this thing called World Team Tennis. And Billie Jean King and her husband at the time, Larry King, no, not that one, and a little bit of pixie dust from folks like, some of these entrepreneurs like Dennis Murphy and others, people like Robert Kraft, who is in the news literally as we speak this week during being Super Bowl time, not getting chosen yet for the NFL for the Pro Football, Hall of Fame. But it's intriguing to know, for those who don't, that Robert Kraft essentially cut his teeth, if you will, in sports ownership with the World Team Tennis outfit, in particular the Boston Lobsters. John Schwarz was involved in both of those things, both the World Team Tennis League as an executive director, or the executive director, whatever the title was. He was very active, let's put it this way, in orchestrating lots of stuff, especially in the last couple of years of the original league's existence. But then also was general manager and overseeing for and with Robert Kraft, the Boston Lobsters franchise, which, as you heard there from our clip in 1978 from HBO, yes, HBO covered a lot of World Team Tennis matches in the latter part of its early original existence. And that was Vic Braden and Julie Heldman from September of 78, which would be literally the last championship season for this first 5 years, if you will, of World Team Tennis's existence. We'll talk about how it soldiered on afterwards in different forms and formats. And by the way, Julie Heldman, a really interesting story that I'm only going down the rabbit hole of. We'd love to have Julie on, her story about her life and her struggles, as well as sort of the relief of that against the march in the 70s of women's pro tennis coming into its own. We'd love to have her on a separate conversation because it's a whole other ball of wax. But I digress, because the enthusiasm, as you can hear in my voice, is sky high for this World Team Tennis thing. And again, if you're not familiar with it, right, a team-based approach, a co-ed approach where women and men in these matches, these 5 matches that were played during the course of an event, you had men playing men, you had women playing women in singles and doubles, but then there was also a mixed doubles combination, which is just a fascinating, amazing opportunity to see both the best at the time, women and men, playing in this team format. And boy, it was wild. The colors of the court, the encouragement of the fans to kind of whoop it up, which is the antithesis of what, today's tours are, when you kind of, shush it up and be quiet and not sort of heckle and that kind of stuff. And it was kind of rock and roll-ish, right? It was kind of new. It was different. It was a different challenge. And folks like Billie Jean King and others were really testing the boundaries of where tennis could go. And again, remember, as we've talked about and hinted at in other conversations, Battle of the Sexes was in the early part of the decade. And the evolution of the women's pro game, which had its fits and starts, Billie Jean King having a major role in those as well. But you're going to hear from one of the inside sources, so all kinds of craziness, both good, bad, and just otherworldly, as we talk about World Team Tennis this week. And boy, are we excited to do so. Can you tell? And John Schwarz is our guest. His book is called, and it came out back in 2020, I think, October 2020 or so. It is called World Team Tennis and the Legacy of a Sports League, 1974 to 1978. And it is available wherever good books are found. We'll have the links for that book in our show description, as well as on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, where either way, you'll go to our friends at Amazon and we'll get a couple of shekels of referral love for when you purchase either the paperback or Kindle versions of such. We thank you for doing that, or at least considering doing that. And if you stick around to the end of the show, we got some giveaways for you, some World Team Tennis giveaways for you, for the little trivia question that we'll have for you at the end of this conversation. Let's get to it now, shall we? It is John Schwarz and myself talking about World Team Tennis. Giddy as all get out I am this week, and here is the conversation we had just a few weeks back. Please, as always, enjoy. How about, for our audience, giving us a little bit of background about your general life before we kind of get into this particular story, kind of what you have done in your career. I think you're now retired and living in Austin, in that area, and maybe help set the scene for what I'm guessing was probably an early sojourn as part of your budding career at the time.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. When I graduated from Harvard Business School in 1963, and I went to work for the CBS television network. What that did for me is it got me into some kind of the world of media. I left CBS after about.
Wait a minute! Before you go further, as a former CBS News guy myself, you're just glossing over CBS like it was no big deal. This was the golden era, if you will. This is the Bill Paley,
Absolutely.
One of three networks era, right?
Yeah, there were three networks. That was really the total television that came into most people's homes. CBS was dominant. I think they had 10 of the first top 10 TV shows in the daytime, and they had probably 8 out of 10 in the evening. So CBS was really a big deal back then. I worked kind of in the television network in an area that sort of was a liaison between finance and marketing. So I was not on the entertainment side, but I did see a lot of what was going on then. Actually, as kind of just a little side story about CBS. They put me, and when I was at CBS, they put me on a team that was looking to diversify the company. And while I was mostly an observer, I was pretty young. I was in the meetings that led to the CBS buying the New York Yankees, if you can remember back then.
Yeah, famously in the early 70s, right?
It would have been a little earlier than that, but you're on about the right schedule. And my only contribution to the meetings was I suggested that if CBS was looking to get into professional sports, that they ought to at least investigate buying the New York Football Giants before they bothered with the Yankees. And I think if they look back, they would think that was a better deal, because the Yankee situation for CBS did not work out well. They helped George Steinbrenner, but that's about it. Anyway, I left CBS. I went to work for a company called International Telephone and Telegraph Company, who at the time were acquiring the ABC television network. And they hired me basically as their person to be the liaison between ITT and the ABC television network. Again, that did not work out terribly well because the Justice Department decided that they didn't think ITT should be owning a television network. And while they didn't actually disqualify the merger, they ultimately dragged on the litigation so long that ITT dropped that, which left me kind of in limbo when that happened. I still wanted to do something in the television world, so I ended up actually taking some of my own money and some of my family's money and investing it in a fledgling company that was a film processing laboratory. At that time, 16 millimeter film was becoming a source for sort of on-site television shows. It was before there was videotape. And so I became a part owner of a company called Cinelab, which was a film processing laboratory in New York City that handled a lot of television work. For example, we did the processing for something called NYPD, which was a television show, I think in those days on ABC. We did all of the film work for the Children's Television Workshop, which had just started then, Sesame Street, all the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things they used to put on.
Oh, sure, those vignettes. Shows. Yeah.
If you remember them as a kid. We also there was a movie called Woodstock that took place in Woodstock where the music festival was. We did all the work on Woodstock. So we did a lot of stuff. We did private films for Robert Duvall. So I got very interested in a lot of people who were in the film business. But as luck would have it, about 2 or 3 years into Cinelab, along came videotape. And videotape began to take over what we were doing. So in an effort to try to salvage what I could, I sold my interest in the company to a couple of the other people who were in it, and had nothing to do, was just out there doing nothing for a while. And I decided I wanted to get involved in professional sports. So my first idea was I wrote a letter to every Major League Baseball team and every National Football League team, seeing if they would have any interest with somebody with my background. Because I had been involved in tennis in college, I was a member of the team at Stanford. I also decided, since there was at that point a fledgling tennis league, to also write the league, which meant writing a letter to Larry King, who was Billie Jean King's husband at the time, and who was the head of World Team Tennis.
And to clarify for our audience of a certain age, of a certain age, not that Larry King that most people know.
No, not that Larry King, not the guy you know from interviews on TV. This guy was a young lawyer who met Billie Jean in college, married Billie Jean, and for several years was her manager and business partner. Obviously, that's not the case anymore. Anyway, so of all those letters that I sent out, the only responses I received, only other than sort of thank you, but no thank you, were one from the LA Rams and one from the Kansas City Athletics and one from Larry King. The two real league, if you want to call them those letters, turned out to be nothing more than somebody just trying to be nice, because when I tried to follow up, there really was nothing there. The only person who really wanted to talk to me was Larry King. And he said, if you can get out here next week, I would love to talk to you. So I got on. I was living at that time on the East Coast in New Rochelle, New York. I got on a plane. I flew to Newport Beach, California, where the league office was at the time. I met with Larry. We met for about an hour. At the end of the meeting, he said, I want to hire you. Can you go to work for me next week? And I said, well, I live on the East Coast. I mean, how would we work this out? He said, well, it'll work out fine, because next week I'm going to be in New York. We're working on negotiations with NBC for our All-Star game. I would like you to come with me for that. You will become the executive director of the league, and you will work with me in Newport Beach. And if you can get out there in the next 10 days or 2 weeks, I'll explain to you exactly what we're going to be doing. So I went home, told my wife, and she said, okay. So I took a flyer. I left my wife and my 2 kids in New Rochelle, and I got a hotel room in Costa Mesa, California, and I went to work for World Team Tennis. This was the summer of 1976. The league had started in 1974, so it was a couple of years old. And when I got there, Larry said, I don't like what I'm doing. I can't stand the owners. I'm going to leave at the end of this season. But if you're here, you can help me, especially when I'm not around. You can talk to the owners, figure out what's going on. He kind of threw me into it without much else other than, swim in the ocean. And so in 1976, in the middle of the season, I was in the league office, and I got to interact with all the owners. I think they were happy that I was there, because Larry didn't like to talk to them, and I was very happy to talk to them. And that's how I got my initiation into world team tennis.
And ostensibly, he was interested in your contributions because of your media experience, right? And it
Yeah,
seems
yes,
like that was a
it was
challenge for
a
the league.
combination of the media experience and the business school credential. I think he thought that would go well with the owners, and um, and I think it did fit. It was, I think I would have had a better chance in other sports at those days had analytics been more popular, but analytics were nothing now. People in Major League Baseball and in the NFL in those days, it was pretty much the good old boy school, where if you hadn't basically been a part of the league as a player or in some other way, a coaching staff, uh, you weren't a real person to them.
What did you know of World Team Tennis going in? You
I
said it was
knew
2 years, but it wasn't
I knew
necessarily. Yeah, it wasn't necessarily well known, but I think it did have some areas of flash, especially in New York too, which I know it made a splash early on. No.
Yes, yeah, no, I knew something about them. I mean, I knew that the league existed. I knew what the purpose of the league was to try to make at least what they said it was to popularize tennis amongst people who might not otherwise be tennis fans, people who were team oriented and who like to go out to a sporting event and cheer for their team, and that tennis could be modified and simplified in such a way that it could become a popular team sport and that it could draw in people who might not otherwise uh, be interested in tennis. And I actually, when I wrote the letter to Larry King, I had not gone to a match before, but the New York team in those days was playing at Nassau Coliseum out on Long Island. So I went to, I think, 2 matches, and I kind of thought it was fun. I liked it. Uh, they had some, they had Billie Jean in the league. They did not have Chris Evert in the league at that time, uh, but they had most of the good women and they had some of the men. In 1974, they did have Jimmy Connors in the league for a year, so it was known. I think the thing that was best known about in those early years was that Billie Jean was the coach of the Philadelphia Freedom uh, in the league, and her friend uh, um, wrote a song called Philadelphia Freedom.
Yeah, I mean that's a white whale for us to get Elton John and frankly Billie Jean King. Although we do have some outreach to her over the last, especially heating up the last couple of weeks. But yeah, that's probably the most famous thing that people may just casually remember about this league. But it was also it was very groundbreaking on another number of different levels. You're hinting at one of them, of course, in that it was entertaining and that it was boisterous and the crowd was encouraged to sort of be in the mix, which was the complete antithesis of the white shoed tradition born sport of tennis. Plus there's also it was very, if you will, polychromatic, right? Both in terms of the uniforms, which were non-white, they were colorful and logos and stuff, and the court was iconically
Multicolored.
multicolored, and it was also groundbreaking in that it was co-ed, right? It was a best of five kind of dynamic, but the beauty of it was that the men would compete against each other in a couple of different contests. The women would too, and then there was a mixed doubles thing, which would just make an amazing experience, I think, for
Yes,
relative to
it was an evening in which you could see men's singles, women's singles, men's doubles, women's doubles, and mixed doubles. And it really was quite groundbreaking. In terms of the team thing, I think an important side effect of it being men and women is that it was it was a big step in women's getting equal pay in the tennis world, because in world team tennis you got paid in accordance with how important you were to the team. And in many cases, the women on the team were more important than the men were. When later on, when I was running the Boston Lobsters, our most important player was Martina Navratilova, and she was paid that way. She was paid the most of anybody on the team. So it was groundbreaking in that regard as well. So it contributed a lot to, as I said, to the progress of women's compensation in professional sports and even in their prestige in professional sports.
Yeah, and this was also during the time, the early 70s, right, was certainly for women in pro tennis, right? The Virginia Slims tour, the creation of that, right, which was a very big deal. It was coming off of out of the wake of this vaunted battle of the sexes thing. Plus also the men's game, right, with WCT and yeah, the professional game was really kind of becoming more, I guess you could say, congealed, and this certainly was part of that mixture as well. But as we'll probably talk about a little later, right, it also became kind of competitive to the tour circuit model, right? Because this was a team approach versus a tour.
Yes, it was. I mean, a lot of people were trying to break away from the hold that the International Tennis Federation had over the game for many, many years, especially when the game was an amateur game. There were a bunch of rich old guys that pretty much controlled what went on. They sanctioned tournaments. They punished players for any kind of transgressions. And in fact, when team tennis started, there was a real battle between the old guard International Tennis Federation and this new upstart league. And something that happened in the first year, which was really quite bad. Had it been only in the United States, I think there would have been an antitrust suit. But Jimmy Connors, who agreed to play in the first year of World Team Tennis for the Baltimore team, had a special arrangement because he wanted to play in all of the major tournaments. The league itself actually allowed the players to play at Wimbledon, broke their season so they could play at Wimbledon. And in those days, in that 1974 season, the season was over before the US Open. The only major tournament that was affected by World Team Tennis League play was the French Open. And Connors had a deal with his team that he would leave them for the time which it took for him to compete in the French Open. And the league itself had a deal with the International Tennis Federation, or at least they thought they had a deal, in which if a player wanted to play in a major tournament and broke away from his team, they would allow that particular player to play in the tournament. So when Jimmy Connors arrived in Paris to play in the French Open, they disqualified him, as they did to Ivan Goolagong that year, who had the same kind of an arrangement. So there was kind of a warfare that was going on. And Jimmy Connors never came back to World Team Tennis after that for various reasons. And had he played in that French Open and won it, he would have won the Grand Slam of tennis that year. So it was an interesting time.
Well, but the attraction, though, I think, right, for the players it was more fun and a different level and type of competition, and that it was a team-based kind of thing. And it's probably probably more enjoyable than being on the grind of a tour.
It was. I mean, it gave them, you can imagine if you're on the tennis tour, you're in a different city every week and you're constantly living out of hotels and things. If you went and played for World Team Tennis, you at least had a home team. And so for a period from roughly the 1st of May until the end of August, you had a home base. If you were playing for the Boston Lobsters, you had an apartment in Boston. And for most of the time during those several months, that's where you lived. And you could sort of have more of a real life than just popping around from one tournament to the other. There was also, I think, it was in the early days when tennis players were finally beginning to get recognized for commercial activities and opportunities. So by being in a city, they also added to that ability to have an attraction, at least within that local area where they became better known.
All right, so it's 1976. You're now in the room. You're negotiating some stuff for the league. What did you walk into, both media-wise and generally with the league? What were the owners grousing about? Why wasn't it more established on television? I know it was on HBO, which was very fledgling in 74 and 75. Some of those tapes are luckily still on YouTube. What did you walk into, and what were you dealing with, owners and television and otherwise?
Well, I think the thing that was the thing that was the most difficult to deal with is you had a whole At that time when I came in, the league was, I think, 10 teams. It had originally been 16 teams. And the reason that it had fallen down to 10 teams was because of finances. People could buy their original franchises for $50,000, which even then was really too little. And I don't know what they thought. I think maybe they thought they were going to somehow make money off just by reselling their franchise or something. But that didn't happen. So six owners washed out right away, and it was down to 10 owners when I got there. And they were from varying degrees of financial capability. You had Robert Kraft and you had Jerry Buss, who were both very wealthy guys and who could afford to pay for whatever they needed to make the team successful. There were also two other owners who were in that same category. There was a fellow named Saul Berg in New York. He was a very wealthy guy. He was a coffee broker. And there was a guy up in Seattle named Don Kelleher, who was in the lumber business. And he had a lot of money. But the other owners were all kind of doing it, on the fly. There was an owner in Phoenix named Jimmy Walker. Jimmy Walker was an interesting guy. His brother had been a roommate of Reggie Jackson's at Arizona State, and Reggie Jackson had given him some money, and his brother had given him some money, but he really didn't have enough money to be playing in this league. And there were other owners like that. So there was this dispute that would go on. The rich owners wanted to pay players to come into the league. They wanted they could afford to do that. And the other guys were more or less using the owners who would buy the expensive players to try to make money. For example, the guy in Cleveland made his money or tried to make his money when Chris Everett came to town. And she was playing in Los Angeles at one point, and she was playing in Phoenix for another point. But the poor owners were trying to make money off the rich owners. And there was a lot of infighting as a result of that. And we needed to upgrade the ownership in order for that league to be successful. And it was a difficult road to follow. I mean, little by little, it was getting there because the attendance was increasing. But that was one of the difficulties of the league. They just didn't have enough really deep pocket owners.
Well, as we learned with our conversation with the late great Dennis Murphy, who we had luckily a number of years back, mostly about
he was a founder.
Well, he was one of the founders for sure, but we learned very quickly in those stories, right? It was which was, by the way, this is very common in the 1970s, given all these fledgling leagues, challenger leagues in particular, right? It was more of a sell franchise first, ask questions later kind of dynamic. Especially when you were starting the thing, because, the ABA and the WHA, right? It's like, it's almost like, well, I got these 7 guys over here, so why aren't you joining? So we can get to 8 or 10 or whatever the magic number was, right? Let's put it this way: I'm not sure that due diligence was necessarily in Dennis's top 10 list of things to do.
No, for sure that was the case. In fact, one of the things that Larry King did to try to add some stability to the league after the first 6 teams washed out, which was a good short-term fix, was he made every owner post a $100,000 letter of credit. So that if something went wrong, the league had the right to call on that letter of credit and to cure the problem at the team level, where the league might be embarrassed by what was going on in that local area. So that washed out some people too. I mean, you had to at least be able to come up with that $100,000 letter of credit to stay in the league. And,
right, well, so that was okay. So there's the owner's dilemma there. But what about the quality of play, the attendance, and frankly, the media thing, right? Because obviously we're talking about an era where media rights were not, first of all, that we didn't have the media landscape we had today. So not as many outlets out there, right? We mentioned HBO.
That's
still
true.
fledgling. I don't think anybody was paying for World Team Tennis, right?
Nobody was. I mean, there was this original deal. By the time I got there, I think it was HBO. They were gone. There was some local television. In fact, when I went to work on the Boston Lobsters, we were able to make a deal with Channel 38 in those days. But they were
WSBK. Yeah.
Yeah, they were the same station that was doing the Red Sox and the Bruins, and they did a number of our matches there. They didn't pay us a lot of money, and we had to had to help them get advertisers, but at least we got on air. So the media thing was the only thing that was going on specific to network television when I went to work in 1976 was an arrangement with NBC to televise the All-Star game, which was largely done because Billie Jean's office had sold a bill of goods to Bristol Myers, and Bristol Myers was the sponsor. And with Bristol Myers, they were able to get NBC to carry it. And of course, the All-Star event had a lot of good names. I mean, tennis was always a sport where you played on the names, and you had Billie Jean, and you had Chris Evert, and you had Yvonne Goolagong, and you had one year you had Ilie Nastase, and one year you had Bjorn Borg. So the All-Star game worked out fine. And in fact, interesting thing about the All-Star game, it was where Dick Enberg, the famous sportscaster, got his beginnings in being a telecaster for tennis, which he then later on did quite successfully for the networks.
Yeah, there's a YouTube video of him getting with that All-Star game. I think he begins in the parking lot there of the Fabulous Forum.
This is the Fabulous Forum in Los Angeles, the home of the Los Angeles Strings, one of 10 franchises in World Team Tennis. In 1976, more than 100,000 fans came to this magnificent arena to see the Strings. In its third year of operation, World Team Tennis had its greatest season ever. Attendance increased 67%, with nearly 1 million fans watching team tennis. That's more fans than attended all the Virginia Slims tournaments, all the WCT tournaments, and all the matches at Forest Hills combined. Truly a remarkable year for WTT. When the league opened its doors in 1974, few gave it any chance for survival, but how wrong they were. With skilled international players, streamlined scoring, professional officials, and a colorful rainbow court, and the exciting team concept all rolled into one, World Team Tennis has captured the imagination of fans throughout the nation. The 1976 All-Star match was in many ways the culmination of the long climb to the top for WTT. It epitomized the best in team tennis. The Eastern Division was made up of the New York Sets, the Pittsburgh Triangles, the Indiana Loves, the Boston Lobsters, and Cleveland Nets. In the West, it was the Phoenix Rackets, the Golden Gators, San Diego Friars, Hawaii Lays, and the Los Angeles Strings. There were some great stars in the league in 1976, such as the gifted Ilie Nastase of Hawaii, Marty Riessen of Cleveland, and a superb young doubles team in Indiana, Mona Garant and Ann Kiyomura. But the cream of the crop gathered in Oakland, July 10th, for the All-Star match, the league showcase. Let's go back to that memorable Saturday night.
Certainly, you could tell he was actually interested in being there, not just sort of there on assignment.
Interesting thing I can say about media, I guess it was the fate of WTT. But as of about 3 or 4 years ago, a director by the name of Mickey Duge, who has a series on Netflix called Losers about sports figures, sold A24 Productions, which is a very well-known producer these days, the idea of a documentary on World Team Tennis and its beginnings. And Billie Jean King is the executive producer on the film. And the film's been done. A lot of it was actually based on stuff that they found in my book. But unfortunately, that film is sitting on the shelf at A24 Films. I don't know whether they're waiting to sell it to somebody. I think Mickey Duge, when I last talked to him, said he's afraid that it's maybe lost to oblivion because films don't sit on the shelf this long. But,
okay, well, so you're breaking news here, John, which is great. We love this, right?
I would like somebody to call A24 and tell them, get that film off of the shelf and put it out, because
there's no question that we're intrigued by that, right? So we'll double click that and see if we can somehow resurrect that, because this is interesting. This is partially why I wanted to talk to you, not only because I just discovered your book, albeit, a couple of years late, but In terms of, we've done a ton of investigation around stuff in the 70s in particular. Michael McCambridge, for example, last year had a great book out just literally talking about this thematic of the 1970s and all the different leagues and entrepreneurs out there and the challengers to the establishment of those leagues and stuff. It was a very interesting period of time, loosely into the late 60s and the early 80s. But, everything from the Major Indoor Soccer League to, to the WHA and everything in between, International Volleyball Association. I mean, you name it. And World Team Tennis, to me, along maybe with the International Volleyball Association, probably one of the leagues that had such an impact and resonant sort of influence, albeit somewhat quietly, that really story hasn't been told. There's not a lot of literature on it. A lot of people have written anything substantive about it. And nor has there been a documentary really, but people know things like the Philadelphia Freedom's story and the Billie Jean King connection and all that stuff. But that's really kind of it. And it seems like it's truly lost without more investigation. So I'm sure you feel the same way.
It is. It's incredible too. And I think the interesting that I found when I wrote the book, and one of the most fun things for me while I was writing the book was, since I had worked in the league and knew a lot of people who were connected with it at the time, and many of those people had gone on and done other things in sports that were very important and are well known in this day and age. So I got to talk to them again, and I think they would echo exactly what you said. For example, people like Leslie Visser, who you may remember from CBS television. She was one of the first women who did the NFL broadcast from the field. She was a sort of a cub reporter at the Boston Globe when I was working for the Lobsters, and she got the Lobsters to cover. And she loved the league, and she just loves to talk about the league. And I know in this movie that was sitting on the shelf, they interviewed her. Jeannie Buss, who ran the LA Lakers, she was just a kid at the time, but she worked for her father for the LA Strings, and she would tell you wonderful things about how the league helped her.
We have connected with her. We've missed each other. We're still working on Jeannie Buss, but I digress.
She would be very good. Well, look, and of course, Robert Kraft and Jerry Buss, they got their start in sports in World Team Tennis. Kraft was a guy in his 30s, and I don't know how old Jerry wasn't much older. And Jerry went on, and I think he absolutely revolutionized the Lakers and did a lot for the NBA. I mean, people don't understand that the NBA in the 1970s was a league that was not very successful financially. They were just hanging on. And what Jerry did with the Lakers gave it a lot of traction and a lot of publicity. And of course, today it's the top of the game. And Kraft, who was determined after he had spent some time with Team Tennis to become an owner of a team and had the money to do that. He had originally wanted to own the Red Sox and took a shot at it and didn't get it, but then ended up owning the Patriots. And of course, everybody knows his history with the Patriots is pretty good. So it was not only did it do a lot to sort of bring along women in professional sports and compensation for women in professional sports, but it also nurtured a lot of people who went on to have other careers outside of team tennis, but whose initial knowledge of the sports world came from their experience in team tennis.
All right, you arrived in the middle of this league's existence. In what shape did you find it, and what were the things you were worried about when you walked in the door and became, where it's this role with the league? Did you ever envision that it would not be around 2 years later, or were you in the mix and thinking this was something that was going to be successful and long lasting?
I thought it had a good chance to be successful. What I found when I arrived was that attendance was increasing, that it was starting to catch on, that the league was getting a better opportunity to bring the best players in. I mean, in the tennis world, then and now, the name of the game is the top players. What sells tennis is the big names. Serena Williams when she was around, Martina when she was around, Bjorn Borg when he was around. Today's stars, Carlos Alvarez and Nadal when he was playing in Federer. Those are the people that the tennis fans want to see. So if you're going to have a successful tennis league like World Team Tennis set out to be, you really had to get the top players to participate. And to get the top players to participate, you had to pay them. And it wasn't like trying to pay a baseball player, because a baseball player didn't have very many other places to play, but a tennis player had the circuit to play on. So the most difficult thing in 1976 was generating enough money and being able to sell a player and his agent on playing in the league and why that was better than playing in the tournament circuit, at least during that time. And that kind of was the determinant of whether the league was going to make it or not make it. In the women's side, the league was very successful. The league really had all of the best women playing by 1970s. When I got there, they had Gulagang and they had Navratilova and they had Billie Jean King and they had just got Chris Evert. So on the women's side, they had everybody. On the men's side, not so much. The best player when I got there, the most important male player was probably Vitas Gerulaitis, who was playing at Pittsburgh. Later on, we were able to attract Bjorn Borg, but never made the real breakthrough with the men where we had the full complement of the better men all together through a season. So that was a concern in 1976. And while I think we were taking steps to get there, we never got there. What happened that eventually killed the league was after the 1978 season, the women who used the league as a way of making more money and had been able to fit World Team Tennis in with the Virginia Slims circuit had suddenly gotten big interest from Colgate as a sponsor. And Colgate had decided that they were willing to put a lot of money into women's tennis and develop a circuit with a championship at the end, and had come to the Women's Tennis Association, which was relatively new, and sold them a bill of goods that this was the way for women's tennis to go. And the women, in their defense, who really liked World Team Tennis, tried to convince Colgate to allow team tennis to continue as actually part of the circuit and to count as part of the points towards the Colgate Cup or whatever you wanted to call it, to include World Team Tennis play. But Colgate wanted their tournaments to be sanctioned by the International Tennis Federation. And the International Tennis Federation said, no, World Team Tennis cannot be part of your circuit if you want us to give you our blessing. So the women had to then choose between, did they play WTT or did they go out on the Colgate circuit and use that time when they would be playing WTT to earn the points to gain the finals of Colgate. And to be frankly honest with you, I think they finally all decided that it was going to be the Colgate circuit that was going to prevail. And so team tennis collapsed. A couple of the owners saw it at the end of that 1978 season. The two major owners who saw it were Robert Kraft and Sahlberg. Sahlberg was New York and Robert Kraft was in Boston. And after they talked privately themselves, they decided that they were going to withdraw from the league because they didn't think that they could attract the players that were necessary to make the league a success. The league tried to continue Dave Peterson in San Francisco tried to keep it going, and he thought he had a deal with Martina, but he really didn't. So the team never really survived after the 1978 season. And it was largely because of the Colgate circuit and because the big money was started to leave. I think Jerry Buss tried to make it stay too. He was willing to fund several teams, but it just didn't have the same pizzazz.
How did you gain oversight over the Lobsters? Was that in conjunction with your league duties, or were you shifting over there by an owner's fiat, or what?
No. What ended up happening was when I joined the league in 1976, I would talk a lot to the owners. As I said, Larry King left town most of the time, so I was on the phone with the owners. I got to know them very well. We had league meetings. I was at all the league meetings. I got to know them then. And then at the end of the 1976 season, Larry completely left. He said goodbye to the league, and the league set out to find a commissioner or someone to replace him to run the league. And there was a lot of interview process, which I was involved with. They asked me to help with that. And in fact, they even humored me by saying, maybe you should be the commissioner, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. At any rate, they interviewed a lot of people. They interviewed, remember Dave DeBusschere, the basketball player?
Of course, New York Knicks legend.
Dave DeBusschere, he was on their radar. They interviewed George Mitchell, who was senator from Maine, I believe. And they finally decided what they really needed was kind of a PR guy for the league, but someone who knew tennis and who had a good head on his shoulders and could help them. So they hired Butch Buchholz. Butch Buchholz had been a player in the league. He was a pro, and he'd done some tournament promoting, and he was the right guy. He really was the right guy. But when he came in, he moved the league office from Newport Beach, which is where I joined the league, to St. Louis, where he lived. And my wife, who had actually made the trip then finally from New Rochelle to Newport, and now I asked her, we're going to go back to St. Louis, which she was very nice about. And we went back to St. Louis. And I worked for the league office in St. Louis for the 1977 season. And I got to know the owners better and better. And I was particularly friendly with Kraft, who would call me frequently about his team and asking for advice. And as things turned out that particular year, Martina Navratilova had joined the league playing for the Cleveland team. And the owner of the Cleveland team was a guy named Joe Zingali. He was a great promoter, but he didn't pay his players very well. He didn't treat his players all that well. He was a very good salesman, but she was already disillusioned. And she as much as told the league office that if she wasn't going to play somewhere else, she was going to leave the league. So they kind of gave me the assignment of trying to figure out how to handle Martina's situation. So Kraft, who wanted a winning team and felt he was being shut out of the top players, that some of the others had gotten the players, the good players, and he wasn't having an opportunity to find them. He was the perfect fit. So we helped instrument kind of getting Martina from Cleveland to Boston, where she was much happier. Joe Zingali was very happy about it because he got money to sell the rights to Martina to Boston. And so I kind of cemented my relationship with Kraft over that. So he came to me towards the end of the season and said, would you consider coming to Boston and running the Lobsters for me and leaving the league office? And my wife heard that, and she thought it was the most wonderful thing in the world, because she was not particularly fond of St. Louis, because she wanted to be near the ocean where she had grown up. So it all worked out fine. And so I left the league office and went to work for Kraft for the 1978 season, right before the 1978 season. And he and it's in the book, but he and I think had developed a plan where we were going to be the first World Team Tennis team that year, 1978, to make a profit. So far, none of the teams had made a profit. They were getting closer and closer and closer. And we had a great arrangement, we thought. because while we played at Case Center, which was part of Boston University, where their hockey league was, it was a nice little 5,000 seat place where we could put our carpet, our court down over what was the ice, where the ice went during the winter. It really wasn't large enough, and it didn't offer us enough opportunity to make the money. And we didn't want to go to the Boston Garden at the time because it was too big and too expensive. But Hartford was a possibility. The Hartford Civic Center Stadium was looking for people to come there. And strangely enough, in Hartford at the time, there was a lot of insurance companies, and the Aetna Insurance Company had a guy who was running it, John Filer, who loved tennis and wanted to do everything he could to bring first-class tennis to Hartford. And so Robert Kraft and I got into a conversation with Filer, and we convinced him to guarantee a certain number of seats being sold at the Hartford Arena for like 7 or 8 of our matches, of the Lobster matches. So for the 1978 season, we arranged to have 8 of the matches played at the Hartford Arena. And from those matches, we knew we had a guaranteed gate. The guaranteed gate was pretty good. And when we mixed that with what we knew we could sell in season tickets in Boston, we had a profit. This arrangement,
a regional approach, right? Almost ahead of its time.
Regional approach, and something which gave us an opportunity again to have a bigger facility for some of our matches. Anyway, this was negotiated in December of 1977, before the season was going to start the next spring. Well, in 1978, I think it was January, I got a call one day from the director who ran the Hartford Arena that there had been a huge snowstorm and that the snow had piled up on the arena's ceiling and the ceiling had collapsed.
Oh, that was
and
that. Yeah, sure.
Arena,
Very famous. Yeah.
We're now postponed for a year. So all of a sudden, we were 2 months away from the start of the season, our profit-making season, and we had 7 matches for which we did not have an arena. And as it turned out, and we did not have our Boston University arena either, so we had to find a place to play the matches. We ended up playing the matches in a small skating facility on Cape Cod. And we really were taken to the cleaners as a result of that. We lost a lot of money on those 7 matches on Cape Cod. I mean, it was fun. Everybody on Cape Cod enjoyed it, but it sort of destroyed our season financially. I mean, it wasn't a big deal for the Crafts, but
aside from the talent issue that you were mentioning before, and the Colgate situation sort of appearing, what could have made the league continue and soldier on, or was it? There is still the lack of television, right? I mean, tell me a little bit about why maybe there wasn't more TV coverage of this league. Were networks kind of just averse to it? And again, putting this in the middle of 1970s, right? Only a handful of networks, handful of stations and TV. Yeah.
Yeah, I think television would have come. I mean, it was a chicken and egg thing a little bit. What the league really, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, but it really was the secret to the league's success was not so much the fact that the game was so good, even though it was good, and even though fans enjoyed it. And what was going to make the league successful was being able to dominate the top players for that period of time from the beginning of May until the start of the U.S. Open at the end of August. And I think we were getting there. I mean, as I say, we certainly had the women, and we were starting to make inroads with the men. I mean, the fact that we were able to negotiate a deal with IMG to bring Bjorn Borg into the league, that was a big deal. And television really was all about, as I say, big names. I mean, you even watch it today when they do an NBA game, they say the Los Angeles Lakers with LeBron James. They always add the the Stars name to it as a way of attracting audience. But we just couldn't quite make it over the hump by getting those players for that period of time to focus solely on team tennis. And I don't know whether we ever would have gotten there or not. I mean, the fact that the women were taken away the way they were, because we had all the women. The women was not an issue. But the men, we were only making slow inroads into, and I don't know whether we would have finally been successful or not.
Were there teams or markets that were especially good or strong and or on the other side of things, comical and just didn't have any reason to be there that you remember?
Yes, the markets that worked were either the markets that had one of those star players or had a particularly good owner. The Los Angeles Strings were very good, and ultimately Jerry Buss, who knew how to buy things, he eventually bought Chris Everett from Phoenix, and he had Eli Nastasi there, and he had a good franchise, and he was certainly approaching making money. The guy in San Francisco, Dave Peterson, was a very smart businessman, and while he didn't have as many stars on his teams, he did things. He had promotions and things like that, and he was doing very well, I think. And he was the one who wanted to keep the league going. He was a very, very good owner, and that was a very good franchise. The Boston franchise was good, and because of the owner. The New York franchise, the New York Sets, Sahlberg was a very good owner because he had good money, and he had Billie Jean, and Billie Jean and Larry pushed Sahlberg to do the right thing. Sahlberg originally had his team in the Nassau Coliseum on Long Island, but the Kings told him that wasn't big league, and big league was Madison Square Garden. So he moved his team to Madison Square Garden. So they were certainly a good franchise. The weaker
weren't those games though in the Felt Forum and not the
They started out in the Felt Forum, yes.
Started out, but they did get get to the main garden.
Yeah, I think it was just the address that they wanted, and the teams that weren't as successful were Phoenix had been when Chris was there, but when she left, they didn't have any money, so they didn't have any players, and the crowds dissolved. Cleveland, in a funny way, was the best and the worst. The reason I say that is the guy who owned Cleveland, as I mentioned before, Joe Zingali, he didn't treat his players well. He didn't spend much money. When he got Borg in the league, he made every other team contribute to Borg's salary as a condition to getting him in the league. He was a great salesman, so he got these players in the league, but he alienated them once they were in the league. So his franchise, I would say was just not, and they didn't attract crowds. In fact, what he did in Cleveland, he got so sick and tired, I guess, of not being able to sell his product in Cleveland, that the last year that he had the franchise, when he had Borg, they became a traveling franchise, which was really a disaster for the league. He called himself the Sun Belt, whatever, and he played the matches all throughout the South. It was almost like, going from city to city. Like,
yeah, technically they were the New Orleans Sun Belt Nets, but they took the New Orleans part pretty liberally.
Yeah, he pretty much called himself the Sun Belt Nets, and he was all over the place. But he did bring some attraction to the league. I mean, he did get Borg in the league, and he had the greatest mixed doubles team of all times at the Sun Belt team. He had Renee Richards and John Lucas. And if you don't know who they are, I'm sure most people know who Renee Richards is, who was a transgender player who was originally Richard Raskin, and who he had all kinds of issues getting into the league. And John Lucas, who was the #1 draft pick from the NBA for the Houston Rockets team, was a very good tennis player. And he signed both of them, and they were his mixed doubles team. And they were good. They were very good. And I don't know anybody. Renee Richards has kind of autobiography out. And anybody reads that autobiography, has some wonderful stories about a transgender tennis player and a black tennis player going into restaurants throughout the South United States in the 1970s. It's just very funny sometimes.
Yeah, she's still around. We wouldn't mind talking to her. I mean, there's so many different little adjuncts into this.
Well, yeah, getting
we-
Renee into the league was not easy.
No, I can imagine. I can
Joe-
imagine. Yeah, go ahead.
Joe Zingali signed her because he signed her because he was, he wanted the attraction of this odd attraction of a transgender tennis player. But as soon as he signed her, we got a lot of the women and some of the other teams didn't want her to play. The women in particular, at first, some of the women said that she shouldn't play. They had this screwball, I mean, to me, screwball, maybe it's not. They had this screwball idea back then that if we allowed Renee Richards to play, or if tennis allowed Renee Richards to participate and compete as a woman, that some 18-year-old guy, some really good tennis player, would go through a transgender operation and come back and dominate women's tennis. I mean, I thought it was crazy, but they were really hooked on that idea for some reason. So they thought if Renee was allowed in, that suddenly their game would be barely adversely affected. So they put up a stink, and then when finally Renee got the courts to side with her for tennis, she was allowed to play every place, and we certainly in team tennis brought her in, so she came in, but she didn't dominate, not at all. I mean, she was another player, and as she turned out to be on the tour as well. But she became a very good mentor in the tennis game. I think she was Martina's coach for a while.
Let me throw out a couple of just a potpourri here of things, and maybe just a little reaction and some thoughts, and then I want to get your we'll wrap it up. I want to get your thoughts about what happened afterwards, and perhaps does it have a chance to potentially come back? But tell me about the Soviets. 1977, there was this thing called there was a Soviet national team that was sort of made the rounds.
That is correct.
The Soviets. What was the story behind that, and what was the purpose?
The story behind it was Larry King was very resourceful, and early in the era of world team tennis in the early 70s, he was at a tennis event. I think it was the U.S. Open, actually, and he became very friendly with the Russian official who was accompanying the Russian players who were playing in the U.S. Open. In those days, it was very difficult for Russians who traveled abroad, because they were always afraid that they might defect. So there was always some kind of a handler with them. So Larry became very friendly with the handler and suggested on a couple of occasions that maybe there ought to be a kind of as a goodwill gesture, a team tennis match between the US and Russia. And they could hold, it could be like a two-match sequence where one match was in the United States and one match was in the Soviet Union, or maybe even two matches in the Soviet Union and one match in the United States. So he tried to sell this for about 2 or 3 years. And finally, one year, they agreed. And I think for 2 consecutive years, there was a US team that went to Russia that played a team tennis match against a Russian team as opponents. And so Russia became familiar with Larry, and they became familiar with the sport. And in the 1977 season, the Pittsburgh team, which was owned by a guy named Frank Fuhrer, dropped out of the league.
Pittsburgh Triangles, yes.
Yeah. Almost at the time the league was supposed to start. And so the league was short a team. And Larry and Jim Jorgensen, who worked for him at King Associates, got the idea that, well, maybe we can fill that spot in the league with a Soviet team because they like it, and then and they could send a team over and be in the league. It'd be good for them. And so he somehow sold them a bill of goods that they could become a traveling team in the league. They would play at different arenas, kind of like the Sun Belt guys did, and they would have it would be called the Soviets, and they were in the league, and they did to bring a team in. Now, the interesting thing about it was that they were so paranoid about their players that a player could only play for 3 or 4 weeks, and then he or she had to go back to Russia. So they had to keep exchanging players. And the fellow who ran, if I can keep going on this, the fellow who ran the Soviet team was a guy named John Korf. He was later another guy who made it as a tennis promoter. And he was a very interesting guy. And John Korf had the Soviet team in Kansas City one day. And when players, especially the women players, left to go back to Russia, there was always a little celebration at that match in which people said goodbye to them. And on courtside, they were handed some flowers and there was a little celebration. So he was in Kansas City. Our league office that year was in St. Louis, and he wanted someone to come from the league office, preferably Butch Buchholz, to give the flowers to Olga Morozova, who was going back to Russia. But unfortunately, Butch couldn't do it. So I was elected to go to Kansas City, which I did. And John, who was always promoting the league, had found somebody in Kansas City who might want a franchise. So he arranged a dinner for me. And I went to dinner with this guy to talk about becoming an owner in the league. And unfortunately, it got late, and I was late getting back to the arena to do what I had to do to give the flowers to Olga Morozova. And as I'm walking into the arena, I hear the public address announcer saying, and now Executive Director of World Team Tennis, John Schwarz, will present the flowers to Olga Morozova. She's going back to the Soviet Union. And I'm running down the stairs to try to get to the arena floor. And I look outside, and there's the guy carrying flowers, and he goes over and he hands the flowers to Olga Morozova and says goodbye, and the ceremony is over. And 5 minutes later, I catch John Korf. I said, "What was all that about?" He said, "Well, you didn't get back in time, and no one knows who the hell you are anyway. So we just picked a guy out of the audience and used him in your place." So anyway, that was the Soviets.
That's amazing. But also, this is around the time too that the WHA and I think even the NHL were Canada versus the Soviet. I mean, the whole hockey thing was really kind of taken off, right? And yeah, that was 1976 Olympics with the basketball team.
When was the miracle?
That was 1980, right? Yeah.
But, I think so that was.
But even in the 70s, the Canadians and the Russians really had it going with each other.
Yeah. No, it was. I think the Soviet thing was a very nice experiment in terms of having the Soviets here. It worked fine.
How about can you explain the sudden death point as a tiebreaker?
Yeah, what ended up happening? There was two sort of tiebreakers during a match. If a match got to be 4-4, that's the way they would end with a tiebreaker. But the super tiebreaker was kind of an interesting theory in the game. You could not win an overall match against another team unless you won the final game. And the way the scoring was for World Team Tennis, it was cumulative games won. So if you got to the fifth event, let's say it was mixed doubles, was the fifth event, and the team that was behind in the cumulative game scores at the end of that match was still had won the last game in that match and won that match. They had to keep playing until the winning team won a game. I don't know whether you can follow this or not. But if in fact it went on long enough so that the team which had been behind had brought the score up to even, then they would have it. I think it was a 10-point super tiebreaker to decide the match. So you were never out of the match until you lost a last game. So
which kept it exciting and interesting for people who might.
Yeah, and
it could have been a 3-0 run, right? Like in volleyball these days.
Yeah, and for example, because the coaches selected there was they flipped a coin and the coach selected the order in which the matches were played. In other words, the coach who won the toss could decide whether men's singles was first, women's singles was second, mixed doubles was third, men's doubles was fourth, and women's doubles was fifth. He could decide, or she could decide that order. And it would be strategic to figure out maybe you want your best team to be playing last, so that if in fact you were behind at the end, that good team could force the other, could force the thing into a tie and to a tiebreaker. So there was a little strategy that went along with it.
Tell me about Ilya Nastasi. It seems like he was kind of one of the guys who really was excellent at generating publicity for the league with his antics, maybe more so or than some of the others.
Yeah, the Romanians, Ilya Nastasi and Ian Teriak, became Americanized when they came over to play in the Davis Cup. And the Romanians were a little less sensitive, I think, than the Russians. So they kind of stayed here for a while. And Ilya Nastasi was a bit of a clown. I mean, he had peculiar antics on the court, even when it wasn't World Team Tennis. But when he got to World Team Tennis, he thought all the restrictions were off. And so, in fact, what he did on a couple of occasions was he would bring a cowbell with him to the matches. And when some of the women were playing, he would make moo sounds and ring his cowbell, which eventually the league talked him into stopping, because it was not the kind of disruption that they were looking for. And Teriak, who was the original coach of the Boston Lobsters, and who was a very good coach, and who has become a very successful person. He's a great entrepreneur and very wealthy now. Ian Teriak had seen some American baseball. And so his idea was that the manager of the team, when he didn't like something, he went out and questioned the referee. So we would have Ian Teriak pretending he was Billy Martin, and he would go out and argue with the lines people and with the referee, and do his version of kicking up the dust out there. And again, that was not exactly what I think Billie Jean and some of the others had in mind when they were talking about, getting the crowd into it. So most of that kind of went away. I mean, there was a lot of strange things that happened in that league originally, but it got cleaned up. We had a guy named Whitney Reed. I don't know whether people remember. He was a good player, a good male player in the 70s. And he was a little bit of a cuckoo bird. I knew him from college. He had played at San Jose State when I was on a member of the Stanford team. And Whitney got in the league, and I think he was number one in the country for one short period of time. At any rate, he was in a match in which he had decided to have a rally with himself, in which he hit the ball from one side of the court, then he ran over and pretended he was on the other side of the court's team, was in doubles, and hit the ball back. And of course, he got the crowd all excited, except it wasn't exactly what the sport had in mind. It wanted to be real tennis, but just with a slightly different format.
Yeah, but it did have to get its own headlines, right, in order to kind of break through the traditional, right? And I guess the one thing that I remember sort of in the diaspora of my understanding of the league and stuff, wasn't there Rod Laver came in at one year, right? And maybe it was in San Diego, I'm not sure. But he was signed. He was rookie of the year, but he was like 38 at the time, right?
That's correct. That is correct. Yeah. That is correct. And in the twilight of his career, Rod Laver did play. In fact, when team tennis died, so to speak, when it died in its original form at the end of that 78 season, it lived on. I mean, Billie Jean took over the league, and she maintained a presence. They cut the league down to a very short time between Wimbledon and the U.S. Open, and they basically brought into the league teams that had young players who were on their way up, who needed to get some good mentoring, which they did, and players who were in the twilights of their careers, who had names that people would come to see, but who really were not as competitive as they once were. I mean, I think Venus played in it for a while after she was not quite at the top of her game, and other players who had names, but who weren't in the prime of their playtime.
So, all right, this is, I mean, amazingness. Let me wrap up this, maybe this one of many conversations. Let's see. Why do you think this concept has not sort of, I think World Team Tennis is kind of dead now, right? I know it came back in a couple of different iterations. You mentioned
Yes, it is.
Came back as team tennis and some other stuff in a narrow form. But it just seems to me that we are now in the midst of I don't know, peak sports, a renaissance, if you will, another generation of entrepreneurs and now backed by tons of money, especially private equity and stuff, and then the valuations and all that kind of stuff. It just seems to me in this day and age, especially with all the media available and streaming and stuff, and athletes and other famous people with money to spend on these ventures, that the idea and the concept of the original World Team Tennis, polychromatic and all, could have a place in the firmament of American sports again. I just wonder why that original 5-year kind of burst of excitement and color and sound and different approach to playing the game of tennis hasn't really kind of broken through again and still occupy a place in a very wide and varied sports industry right now that could probably support it.
Let me. There are two things I think that might be interesting in this area. I don't think it's going to come back as a professional sport, and I think the reason is because tennis has been, just like the Davis Cup isn't really. I mean, it's still played, but the Davis Cup used to be just really a big deal back in the day when the Australians and the Americans played, but it isn't anymore because tennis has become centered around the majors. It's where all the money is. It's where all the TV wants to be. So the four majors, the Australian, the French, the U.S. Open, and Wimbledon, have basically stolen the calendar, and everything revolves around them. And that's where really all the big money is for the players in terms of what they get as a payday for playing in it, what they get as a payday for the endorsements they get from their performance there. So there's no real fit in the schedule for a World Team Tennis of any substance. Now, the interesting thing about team tennis, the concept, a close friend of mine is Dick Gould, who was, in my mind, the best college tennis coach of all times. He coached at Stanford for many, many years. I think he probably has the most NCAA championships of any tennis coach in college game. Told me at one time that the colleges have seriously considered using the World Team Tennis format for college tennis. That is, going away from having a men's team and a women's team and having a mixed team compete for NCAA championships. And they think it has a much better attraction for getting publicity for college tennis. They think it's economically better for college tennis. And it fits more with the college idea of what sports should be. So it may be that that's where team tennis gets revived.
That would be very interesting. And you think about it, given all the let's call them non-revenue sports, right?
I think if colleges adopted that version of the intercollegiate sport, that television would flock to it to telecast it.
I think that's a very interesting concept. I'd love to hear more about that. I will keep an eye out for that. All right, let me ask you this one last question, and then I'm going to let you promote the book and stuff. We'll promote the heck out of the book, of course. Don't worry, but I'll let it hear it in your words. We kind of obsess on this show, especially with teams and leagues that have gone by the wayside or have been previously domiciled or have been, cul-de-saced into oblivion, whatever, about where their memories live, where the championship banners might be, and the cups and the trophies and the various things and that stuff. Now, obviously, World Team Tennis is unique in that it sort of came and went, and obviously it had some other iterations thereafter. But if I'm looking for, I don't know, that Los Angeles Strings championship banner from the last season of the original league, the some court stuff or arenas or places in the past where these matches were played and people want to remember it. The Philadelphia Freedom's locker room story, Billie Jean King and Elton John. Maybe some of these things are not memorable in a physical way, but where would one go? Is it the internet? Is it the Tennis Hall of Fame? Or is it not anywhere? And or maybe only at the edges, maybe at a particular team or somebody's basement or attic?
It's certainly not in the Tennis Hall of Fame. I think it's in somebody's attic, to be honest with you. I know when Mickey Dudge was doing this film that we talked about earlier, I think he got most of his artifacts from me. I still have a few things that I kept, posters. I have an All-Star. I have 2 years of All-Star jackets. I have a Lobster women's skirt, T-shirts, that sort of thing. I think you might be able to find some if you really. I bet you the Kings have some. I'll bet you Billie Jean and Larry somewhere have some, or know where there is some. I've tried to generate some interest at the Hall of Fame, but so far they don't seem very interested in the history of World Team Tennis.
And okay, so let me double click on that. Why not? Is it because it was a quote unquote failure, or something that the tennis elite don't want to remember because it came and went and it was, because I've seen that in other sports and other situations. Like, for example, indoor soccer is persona non grata essentially in the National Soccer Hall of Fame, which is crazy because indoor soccer kept the game alive in this country for a while when outdoor went kaput and came back.
I think because it was a rebel league, just like maybe indoor soccer was, it never really was accepted by the tennis world. The people who were running the tennis world back then, and I think maybe some of those kind of people are still basically overseeing the Hall of Fame. I really don't know exactly why. It just seems odd to me, because it seems to me it's an important, maybe short but important part of tennis history.
I totally agree, and that's partially why we do this extravaganza of arcana because in an important way, sometimes in a flip and trite way, but in a very real way, right? This was in the 1970s what was a major league. It broke rules. It laid groundwork for things thereafter. Famous people were involved in it. Some of the best players in the world were part of it. And as you said before, some amazing careers were birthed or accelerated by it, in Messrs. Kraft and Buss and Jeannie Buss as part of the ongoing Buss family thing, and just it's to not remember it or to ignore it or to somehow overlook it is I'm not saying that it needs its own Hall of Fame per se, but to not remember it and know that made it some contributing factors to the sports history and to the sports landscape, I just think is a crime.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 87 years old, and I've offered. Maybe I just haven't gotten to the right people, but I've offered the Hall of Fame, of which I am a member. I've offered them my records and files. I have a lot of stuff. I may have kept more than anybody else did after the league died, and no one seems very interested in putting it into their archives.
What would you think about donating it maybe to a college that is tennis
I would,
friendly or
I
sports
would
history?
donate it to anybody who would perpetuate its life, so to speak, for people who were doing research or anything else. That's why I was a very good resource for this guy Mickey Duge. He came to me from the book, but he was amazed at how much stuff that I had that was helpful to him.
All right, so we put that out there for our listeners who have listened this far. They're probably intently interested in what you've just said, and you never know who listens to this show. Actually, I'm surprised each week. We get all kinds of some famous and other influential or people out of the woodwork. You'll be surprised that maybe you'll get a call or an email from me forwarding somebody to you to maybe take you up on that conversation and then some. All right, so let's talk about the book, promote the heck out of it, and where can people find you elsewhere besides buying the book, or do you sort of retreat and not sort of participate in the social media and or web stuff?
They can find me on Amazon if they go on to Amazon and do a book search. And for example, if they were to put in the name of this book, which is World Team Tennis: The Legacy of a Sports League, and my name, John Schwarz, spelled Schwarz, they would be able to find that book, and then they would find about the author, and they could click on that, and they could see all the other books that I've written and see if they have an interest in them. I've written books, both fiction and nonfiction. The one nonfiction book that sports people might find interesting is I've written a book about, it's called It's Time to Sell Those Sports Cards. I am a sports collector, and I've had experience both collecting and selling sports memorabilia. And so this book is about some of my experience doing that.
And do you have any other stories in you from your sports, either collection or your World Team Tennis or the diaspora from that still have yet to be delivered, or do you think you've kind of exhausted all those experiences and those thoughts?
No, I think most of them are out there in one book or another. I think the good thing about the team tennis book, we hit on a few of them, but there's some interesting anecdotes in the tennis book about patchwork that had to be done to try to make our franchises a little bit more professional than they really were, including one I'll leave it to the readers perhaps to find in the book about what happened when we had to put on a playoff game in Boston, in which the ice was already there for the BU hockey team to play on, and we had to get our court positioned over the ice.
That must have condensation is a word that pops to my mind.
Yeah, there was a lot of things involved in there, including having to to do something behind Red Auerbach's back.
I can imagine. Well, there's only 390 some odd pages to this book, so I can't imagine people won't want to dig in. And John, I thank you. This has been amazing. I'm only sorry that it took us more than 5 years to get this conversation underway and for me to have discovered this book.
Well, I appreciate it greatly. I will tell you. Can I tell you one last story?
Please.
That isn't in the book.
Go right ahead.
It's about the way the book came about. I was retired from business and I had nothing else to do. And my son, who you might someday want to talk to, is the godfather of NIL. My son is an economist. He has been he's prepared the economic expertise that's been in all these NCAA suits. He is a co-author of the legislature that was passed in California that started NIL and this whole business with the transfer portal. At one time, before all that was passed, he and some others had concocted the idea of putting together a college pay-for-play league that they were sponsoring or trying to sponsor, in which they were going to use the historical Black universities to put together a league in which there were sponsors. The players got paid. They still went to school, but they were being paid. It was before players could get anything through the regular NCAA. And when he was doing that, he was interviewed by Sports Illustrated, and Sports Illustrated asked him about where did he get the idea of starting a league and what was his background. And he said, my father had this, when I was a little kid, my father had this harebrained idea to go to work for a professional tennis league. And of course, he said it was World Team Tennis and everything else. And after that was in print, I said to him, that league was not so harebrained. There was a lot of things that came out of that league that were very important and should be remembered. And so I said, I think someone should write a book about it. And he said, well, why don't you write a book about it? So that's how the book came about.
Man, oh man, so much stuff in that discussion and many more things to follow up on and with, courtesy of John and his great memories of this incredible, at least initial version of a league that I would argue that is has not really gotten its due in terms of the innovation, perhaps way ahead of its time, brought to the game of tennis. And one wonders if the team version again could make a splash in a world of pro sports today where no idea seems to be going unfunded, shall we say, right? So many different innovative things out there. It's like the 1970s all over again, but maybe cubed in terms of the velocity of all of it. And so many things that we will follow up with, courtesy of this conversation. For your knowledge out there, and maybe for your assistance, we got a couple of entreaties out to the great one, Billie Jean King, to talk about World Team Tennis, and obviously let's talk about other things too. But let's keep our fingers crossed for that. There are, as you heard, there is a film that apparently is sitting in the can from A24 Films, which is a big deal production company, a documentary on the World Team Tennis thing that is floating around out there, and for whatever reason has not found a landing pad for distribution. So we got to crack a couple of walnuts on that and find out what's going on there. Maybe get the person behind that film to come on and talk about it. Maybe talk it up a little bit so we can get more access to this and more stories, which frankly are few and far between for this league, the original World Team Tennis. The book, again, must read, really interesting. Again, you want the origin story of Robert Kraft and all his stuff with the Patriots and all that stuff in Boston and stuff, etc. So much stuff embedded in this book by John called World Team Tennis and the Legacy of a Sports League. It is out now. It's been out now for a couple of years. It's independently published, but the best way, of course, to help celebrate the league and give us a couple of shekels of referral love when you do so is to go check out the links in this podcast episode, however you're getting this show, and or on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, where we post all of our episodes. Just click on the convenient links there and you'll be taken away to Amazon, and where you can get the either the paperback or Kindle versions of John's really intriguing book. What else? While you're online, of course, goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's where we are. You can follow us on all the socials. Let's see, where else? On most of them, we're on Good Seats Still Available, all one word. You'll find us on the X Twitter thing at Good Seats Still. And you'll find us on Blue Sky, where we're probably the most active these days, at goodseatsstillavailable.com. You can send us email at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com as well. And as promised, a trivia question we've got a couple of posters, really brand new, spanking, the beautiful, lush color, full color posters, promoting the 1978 Boston Lobsters season. It's got all the the dates on it and the various places in it and stuff. So great pictures of folks like Martina Navratilova and the other players, courtesy from John's Vault. We've got three. We've got three posters from the old Boston Lobsters World Team Tennis. You'll love this. These are very rare. I'm not encouraging to resell them somewhere, but you probably get a nice price for these things. But they make a smart addition to your sports cave, shall we say. If you're intrigued with leagues and teams that don't exist anymore like we are, this will be a very smart addition, and I think you'll enjoy it. If you are correct in answering one of the first three to correctly answer this, I think, pretty easy trivia question. Here it is. We know that there were a ton of different teams and names and cities that enjoyed World Team Tennis franchises during the first 5 years of its existence from 74 to 78. In New York, though, in particular, there were two named teams. I think they were continuously owned by the same owner, but they had two different names. There was the first couple of years, they were known as one name, and then for the last two seasons, they were known as another name. What were the two names of the New York franchise in World Team Tennis from 74 through 78? They were known as two different names. One was the original name, and the second name was a fan contest name for what they became after the first 3 years of their existence. They played in places like Madison Square Garden and Nassau Coliseum, the Felt Forum, which was essentially the basement of Madison Square Garden. But this New York franchise was there for the beginning and the end, if you will, this first iteration of World Team Tennis. What was the name of those two New York branded franchises? Be one of the first three. Send your answers, the first three correct answers, to hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. And we timestamp them so we know when to come in. And we'll be more than happy to send you one of these great posters. They're in pristine condition, and you'll love them, especially from the Boston area. You're a tennis fan. You got a sports cave. You love forgotten sports, all that stuff. All right. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Jerry Payne, of course, for his audio excellence this week. More to come next week. We'll see what we got in our little closet of goodies. And take care. Thanks for listening.